Welcome to Motivation at Hand, Ma. To know is to know how. Part 5. Case 123CR00257 TSC Document 139 filed November 6, 2023, in the United States District Court for the District of Columbia, United States of America versus Donald J. Trump, defendant. Government's omnibus opposition to defendant's motions to dismiss the indictment on statutory and constitutional grounds. A. The defendant's statutory challenges lack merit. 2. The indictment adequately alleges violations of 18 U.S.C. sections 1512K and C2. The indictment charges that the defendant corruptly obstructed and impeded an official proceeding, namely, Congress's certification of the presidential election, and conspired to do so. Electronic Case Files, ECF, number 1 at paragraphs 125 to 28. The defendant argues, ECF number 114 at 21 to 27, that the indictment fails to allege that he engaged in any conduct that obstructed or impeded the certification proceeding or that he acted corruptly. He is wrong again. A. The indictment alleges the defendant conspired to, attempted to, and did obstruct and impede the certification proceeding. Section 1512C, 2, prohibits all forms of corrupt obstruction of an official proceeding other than the document destruction and evidence tampering. That is already covered in Section 1512C, 1. United States v. Fisher, 64F.4th 329, 336, D.C. circa 2023. Section 1512C, 2, thus encompasses all forms of obstructive conduct, including efforts to stop Congress from certifying the results of the 2020 presidential election. Same as at 335. As the defendant acknowledges, ECF number 114 at 22, the verbs Congress selected in Section 1512C, 2, are non-controversial. United States v. Montgomery, 578F Supplement 3rd 54, 70, DDC 2021. The words obstruct and impede naturally refer to anything that blocks, makes difficult, or hinders. Marinello v. United States, 138 Supreme Court 1101, 1106, 2018, citing dictionaries. In Fisher, the court concluded that indictments that, in addition to charging 3 defendants with other crimes, alleged that each defendant attempted to, and did, corruptly obstruct, influence, and impede an official proceeding, and defining that proceeding as the certification of the Electoral College vote, 64F 4th at 333. Sufficiently stated violations of Section 1512C, 2, even in the absence of specific allegations describing each defendant's conduct, same as at 350. The indictment here unmistakably alleges the actus reus element for a violation of Section 1512C, 2. Consistent with Fisher, the indictment tracks Section 1512C, 2, statutory language and identifies the specific congressional proceeding, the certification of the Electoral College vote, that the defendant is alleged to have obstructed. See ECF number 1 at paragraphs 126, 128. Moreover, the indictment is replete with allegations that the defendant conspired to obstruct, attempted to obstruct, and in fact obstructed the certification proceeding on January 6, 2021. For example, the indictment describes the defendant's efforts to devise a plan to marshal individuals to serve as fraudulent slates of electors in several targeted states who would make and send to the Vice President and Congress false certifications that they were legitimate electors. Same as paragraph 53, see same as at paragraphs 53 to 69, describing plan in detail. The defendant also sought to deceive state officials into undertaking efforts to derail the January 6 certification proceeding through direct overtures from him and his co-conspirators working outside the executive branch. See, same as paragraph 15. Defendant and co-conspirator 1 made knowingly false claims of election fraud to the Speaker of the Arizona House of Representatives. designed to interfere with the ascertainment of and voting by Arizona's electors, paragraphs 31, 31F. Defendant in a phone call lied to the Georgia Secretary of State and insinuated that the Georgia Secretary of State and his counsel could be subject to criminal prosecution if they failed to find election fraud, as the defendant demanded in service of the defendant's effort to induce the Secretary of State to alter Georgia's popular vote count and call into question the validity of the Biden electors' votes, which had been transmitted to Congress weeks before, paragraph 38. Co-conspirator 1 reiterated an unsupported claim of election fraud in a text message to the Michigan House Speaker in an effort to get the Speaker to assist in reversing the ascertainment of the legitimate Biden electors. He sought the same result through a letter that was proposed by a co-conspirator within the executive branch that contained numerous knowingly false claims about the election and the Justice Department. Same as paragraph 75. The defendant additionally used knowing false claims of election fraud to pressure and target the former vice president, to induce the vice president to fraudulently alter the election results during the January 6 certification proceeding. See same as paragraphs 86 to 104. And on January 6, the defendant directed a large crowd of supporters, whom he knew to be angry based on his election fraud lies, to go to the Capitol and obstruct the proceeding. See same as paragraphs 10d, 98, 104. The defendant likewise sought to exploit the violence that overtook the Capitol and caused the suspension of the certification proceeding on January 6, including by publicly attacking the vice president 11 minutes after rioters had broken into the Capitol building. The vice president had to be evacuated from the building 1 minute later, and rioters called the vice president a traitor and for him to be hanged. See same as paragraphs 109 to 113. Those allegations readily established that the defendant conspired to, attempted to, and did obstruct and impede the certification proceeding. The defendant's principal counterargument, ECF number 114 at 23, mischaracterizes the indictment, thereby failing to accept the allegations as true. See Weeks, 636F Supplement 3rd at 120, as focused solely on lobbying of state officials and members of Congress. That is flawed in at least 3 respects. First, as the preceding paragraph makes evident, the indictment alleges not lobbying but instead a concerted effort to target knowingly false and fraudulent claims at government officials, and then seeking to exploit actions by a violent and chaotic mob in order to defeat the certification proceeding. Second, just as with Section 371, Section 1512c, 2's mens rea requirement, that a defendant act corruptly when engaging in his obstructive conduct, prevents the statute from sweeping up a great deal of conduct that has nothing to do with obstruction, including lobbyists who know they advocate for morally wrongful causes. Fisher, 64F 4th at 339. Finally, any concerns about constraining lobbying and advocacy are not implicated in January 6 cases, because the electoral vote certification by Congress is not a policymaking exercise open to political jousting, but instead a constitutionally scripted transition of presidential power, with an outcome determined by the results of a presidential election. United States v. Robertson, F. 4th, 2023 WL 6932346, at 12, D.C. circa October 20th, 23. Footnote 5, the defendant's cursory suggestion, ECF number 114 at 23, that several interpretative canons militate in favor of his cramped reading of Section 1512c, 2, lacks merit. Not only did Fisher reject the reading he advocates, it also explained how statutory canons, including those on which he relies, do not support that reading. See 64F.4th at 345-46, discussing E Justum Generis and Nocitur Associus canons, same as at 348-50. Discussing anti-surplusage and mousehole canons, same as at 350, discussing lenity and restraint. Relatively, the defendant's ill-conceived hypothetical, ECF number 114 at 23-24, that advocacy efforts by an activist who opposed COVID vaccine mandates, but does not appear to have acted with criminal intent, would amount to felony obstruction. Has no relationship to the allegations in this case. It is common ground between the parties that the legitimate efforts of lobbyists and protesters to influence policymaking or to express political views, Robertson, 2023 WL 6932346, at 12, would not violate Section 1512c, 2. Footnote 6. Indeed, as the defendant correctly notes, ECF number 114 at 22N4, by foregoing any prosecution theory based on influence, the indictment undoubtedly does not reach lobbying efforts. The indictment would likewise suffice under a narrower conception of Section 1512c, 2, actus reus element, which Fisher rejected, that focused on tampering with records. See ECF number 114 at 21. The certification preceding that the defendant and his co-conspirators are alleged to have obstructed is required under the Electoral Count Act, which specifies procedures that rely on specific core records, certificates of votes from each state. The President of the Senate opens the certificates in the alphabetical order of the states, and calls for objections, which must be in writing. Footnote 7. Citations to the Electoral Count Act are to the provisions operative between November 2020 and January 2021. After the two houses resolve any objections, the votes are counted with the aid of 4 tellers. Same as. Congress may not recess until the count of electoral votes is completed and the result declared. Same as Section 16. When the count is completed and the winner declared, a record of the votes is entered on the journals of the two houses. Same as Section 15. Preventing the members of Congress from validating the state certificates constitutes evidence-focused obstruction and thus would violate Section 1512c, 2, even on a narrower view of the statute's scope. That is particularly true where, as here, the criminal conduct included falsifying electoral certificates and transmitting them to Congress. See ECF number 1 at paragraphs 53 to 69. To be continued. Part 6. B. The indictment alleges the defendant acted corruptly. Much appreciation to you for giving of your time with us at Motivation at Hand. To know is to know how. We trust you will come back soon.